So I'm on now day 15 in my apartment, and I've been reflecting a little bit on my career path. I feel pretty fortunate that I'm working as a software engineer and I'm able to work from home while there are plenty of people who either are out of work or have to go to work. So I'm definitely blessed in that regard. But my journey from college to the adult world was a little unconventional. Having grown up in the US, my first actual job out of college was in Germany. I traveled to Austria a lot for that job, and then for a little bit after that, I lived in Italy, before eventually transitioning back to the US. Because of this, I think I have a pretty unique perspective on the differences and similarities between working in the US and in Europe. And so I thought it would be a fun idea to document some of those differences and share it with the YouTube world. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention a few things. Obviously, things can change a lot just between company to company. So this is by no means an exhaustive overview of the differences between all the European countries and all the different states in the US for that matter. It's also going to change a lot between careers. Working as a software engineer, there's probably a high likelihood that jobs are going to be much more similar between the two countries, whereas if you're a carpenter, probably pretty unlikely that you're just going to head over to Germany and start working. So what I tried to do here was distill some of the big picture takeaways from my perspective. So what was my path? Well, it's worth noting that as a student, I actually studied German studies as my major with a minor in computer science. So I spent a year abroad in Potsdam, Germany, which is a suburb of Berlin. It was there I was studying IT systems engineering, but the classes were in German. Then I spent a semester back in the US, finished my degree, and started looking for jobs. I knew that if I didn't go back to Germany right away, it was very unlikely that I was going to ever. Obviously, I would be able to travel and visit some of the great friends I made, but it would have been obviously a lot more difficult to get up and move after I've created a life in the US. So I applied for some jobs and got one in Berlin. The visa process was surprisingly easy, and that's because I worked for a mid-sized company, about 300 employees, and they handled a lot of the heavy work. I sent them a bunch of documents, but they applied, and all I had to do was, when I showed up, visit a city hall, which took a few hours, but then I was done. So I guess I would definitely advise you, if you're looking for a job, a larger company is probably going to have more systems in place to help you with that transition of moving. Once I was there, it was awesome. The company I was with was great, and the people at the company were awesome. Also, because I lived only an hour away from my friends that I had made when I was a student, I was able to travel on weekends and see them pretty often. The company that I was working for was actually based out of Austria, so at least once a month I was heading on a plane over to Austria in Graz, and that was always a blast. When I was working in Germany, things were pretty simple. I would walk to work because I lived about 20 minutes by foot away, and I really liked that. It kind of gave me 20 minutes to wake up in the morning, and after work, it allowed me to clear my head. Now, I spent about a year and a half there before I started wanting to branch out. I thought it would be cool to learn Italian and pick up my master's. Because I'm from the US, I didn't ever view it as a long-term solution to stay in Europe. My family's in the US, and so I thought maybe 3 to 5 years was my timeline. Because of that, I thought it would be cool to spend the last 2 years in Europe studying my master's in Italy. So I applied for a program in Venice and got a full ride. Everything was covered. I decided to accept, and a few months later, I was moving. Once I got settled in there, I talked to another student who helped me get a job at a small company where I'd be working about 20 hours a week, again as a software engineer. That visa process was a little more difficult, but manageable. Again in Italy, I was walking everywhere. I walked about 25 minutes to campus. Where the job was about 25 minutes from campus as well, and about 15 minutes from my apartment. But after a few months there, I got pretty sick and had to move back to the US. While I was home, I decided I would look for a job, and if I found something good, I would move back and stay in the US. Fortunately, I found an awesome job that I've been at since. I now live about a 25-minute walk from where I work, but admittedly I normally just take the 5-minute drive. And since I grew up here in Minnesota, although it actually took some getting used to when I moved back, it's what I know. So I think it'd be worth comparing the jobs in a few different ways. The first way I'll look at is the office environment. Now these were surprisingly similar, probably more similar than I would have guessed before I moved to Europe. In Germany, our branch worked out of a co-working space, whereas in the US and when I was in Italy, We had our own office, though also it was an open environment. At all jobs, I was given my own computer. I got to choose between a Mac and a PC in both Germany and the US, whereas in Italy it was just a PC. But in all offices, I always had my own table as a desk, as well as a monitor, though in Germany I got two. Though the company was definitely more stable than how things were in Italy, and I'm at a startup in the US, so also a little more stingy. What was great about Italy, though, is either once or twice a week, they would have the whole office in the kitchen area and have a chef make pasta, which was delicious and fun. In each country, English was also the only thing that was required. When I was in Berlin, I was working about half and half between German and English. But there were plenty of people who actually worked at the company who didn't speak any German. They were hired from all over the place, between Syria, Tunisia, Russia, Iran, so it was an extremely diverse office. And as a software engineer, English is kind of the language of code. All the comments in the code were in English, even if the team was working completely in German. So that wasn't anything I needed to worry too much about. And at every place I've worked, I've been extremely fortunate to have great coworkers. One thing I definitely noticed is that between countries, there are definitely cultural differences. But when you get to know individuals, people are pretty similar everywhere. They have the same kinds of problems, and it's always fun to joke around about the dumbest stuff. But what about the work level? Well, during work, I would again say pretty similar. Where things get different is when you look at a bigger picture over time. It's hard to compare directly with Italy because then I was working 20 hours a week as a student job. But between Germany and the US, I worked between probably 3 to 5 more hours a week in the US. Also, things are definitely different when you look at vacation time. In Germany, I had some crazy number, like 28 days a year, and that didn't include public holidays. Those were in a documented system where you would apply for days off and it was all handled. Whereas in the US, that's definitely not the case. But now again, I'm in a startup in the US, so there's definitely always a trade-off when you're working at a larger company that has more systems in place and a startup that's just trying to grow. But I think it is fair to say you generally work more hours in the US on average. But that said, I make a lot more money in the US, so you're definitely getting a trade-off. So if you're looking at work-life balance, I think I would definitely give the edge to Europe. And again, most of that is looking at Germany and Austria. And so I don't exactly know if that's going to be the same thing if you find a job in Spain or the Netherlands. But from what I've heard, that probably is the case. But what about lifestyle? Well, again, completely depends on where you are. In my experience though, things were a lot simpler in Europe. Now part of that is because I knew I wasn't settling in for the long haul. I paid for rent, I paid for food, but otherwise, I didn't have a car payment, I was buying train tickets, I had fewer things to worry about. Whereas in the US, mo money, mo problems. Got a car payment, I'm thinking a lot more about long-term savings, but I do have a lot more discretionary spending. So I would say, if I had to choose between the two, it just depends. Certain weeks, I miss being able to not worry about anything, take a train to my friend's place, party a bit, take the train back, but then other weeks, I feel extremely fortunate to be in the position I am here in the US. When it comes to healthcare, I would actually say it's a wash. Now this is not a video comparing the healthcare systems between European countries and the US, but when I was in Germany, I was paying somewhere between 12 and 15% of my income towards the healthcare, and then I was completely covered. Whereas in the US, it's a much smaller percentage, but I have a deductible, though I will say, because compensation is higher, I'm probably getting a better deal in the US. So when it comes to lifestyle between the two, it's just completely a trade-off. There are certain people who would definitely thrive in that European style company where you're not making as much, but things can be a lot simpler. Whereas there are others who just love to work. They like higher earnings, and they don't mind the extra hours. And so that's something you definitely have to decide for yourself. So in the end, you have to take everything I'm saying within the context from where I'm saying it. I'm from the US, my family's from the US, so like I said, I always knew I was going to end up here. That said, I have to say, after going through it all, it's so much more doable than I ever knew. Like I said before, I didn't actually need a second language, though I used it in my German job and started learning Italian when I was there. The company I was at in Germany was hiring people from all around the world, a lot of whom didn't even speak German. Now, it was beneficial to learn, and I would certainly recommend learning German or learning the language of the company you go to, because it's going to be more fulfilling and you'll get just so much more out of it. You'll be able to incorporate yourself into the culture. But that said, don't let that be the only thing that holds you back if you're looking at maybe going to Europe for a few years. So I hope that gave some insight into the differences between working in Europe and the US. Like I said a few times, this is completely my opinion. It's what I got out of it. But nevertheless, I hope you found it interesting. If you did, feel free to subscribe to more content somewhat like this. I do a mix of videos between teaching programming to talking about the programming industry. Also, if you like the video, feel free to like and comment, which will help me grow the channel. Alright, have a good day.